Hi, I'm Charlie Sanders. I'm chairman of the National Music Council of the United States, and it is my esteemed honor and privilege to have a chance to have a in-depth discussion, really, with Dr. Ahmad Sarmast, one of the great free speech and music education heroes of the world. And I do not use that term lightly. He is truly someone who has been on the front lines of the fight for free speech, for students to be able to learn and have access to music, and has jeopardized his own personal safety at times to do so. So he is a leader who leads from the front. He is an inspiration to all of us. And Dr. Sarmas, I thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today.
It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be with you today, and also to share with you my experience and to share my experience with your audiences. So the privilege and the honors are all mine.
Well, thank you. So let's get started right away, because not everyone in the music community knows the incredible story of what you've done in Afghanistan and the saga of establishing your music school there and needing to escape from the resurgent Taliban. So why don't we start by giving the audience a bit of a background on the protagonists here, starting with a brief history of the Taliban in Afghanistan and how you came to leave the country and then return to establish one of the preeminent music schools in the world.
Unfortunately, the last 20, 40 years of the Afghan history is marked by violence, cultural vandalism, deprivation of people from their cultural and musical rights, time that Afghanistan was entirely deprived for freedom of expressions. And all this began in 1990s, at the beginning in a softer manner, but as soon as the Taliban came into power, they began a systematic destruction of intangible and tangible cultural heritage of Afghanistan. And Taliban forcibly denied the entire people of Afghanistan from their cultural rights, educational rights, and human rights. It's happened during their first reign. Some of the audiences might remember the destruction of the two Buddhas, the two largest Buddhas of the world in the city of Bamyan, destroyed by the Taliban.
Yes.
The vision, the videos of the destruction of artifact in Kabul Museum. I mean, the artifact is historical, cultural monuments of Afghanistan, in the same way as the Buddhas of Bamyan were destroyed. But at the same time, videos and photos exist of the first time of the Taliban where they destroyed musical instruments and hanged them on the trees, like hang a human being. Destruction of the tapes. Just by miracle, the music archive of Radio Afghanistan survived. And that survival was also the result of the sacrifices of the employees of the radio archive. Otherwise, the Taliban could destroy the rich musical archive of Afghanistan as well. If we're talking about the Taliban, first reign of the Taliban, how they come into power, how they behaved in the power, how they treated arts, culture, human rights, women's rights, it was the most draconian way that's probably the world did not witness it in the past. And still, now that the Taliban are back into power, there was a lot of speculation in the political cycles involved in peace negotiation with the Taliban, promoting and whitewashing Taliban as a different people, selling Taliban as a political group that has enormously changed. They changed their attitude, they changed their belief, they changed their ideology towards the life.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's happened.
So
now that I'm talking to you,
yes,
the situation of human rights, freedom of expression, cultural rights is worse than during the first reign of the Taliban.
Well, you left Afghanistan and then returned to establish a school that gained international prominence in bringing music back to Afghanistan after the Taliban left for the first time. Can you talk a little bit about that and your championing of women's rights as well at the same time in establishing the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, ANIM, which has been in the news so much recently?
I left Afghanistan during the civil war. I was a student in Moscow when the socio-political situation changed in Afghanistan. And of course, and that's the time that's even before the arrival of the Taliban, that discrimination against music and musicians began, and discrimination against people who've been educated in the Soviet Union. The discrimination against them began as well. In that time, I could not return back to Afghanistan, and I requested, I asked for a political asylum in Australia, and I've been given this status. But when the regime of the Taliban collapsed, there was a lot of talks about building a democratic society in Afghanistan, building a civil society in the country. And in 2000, towards the end of 2005, the beginning of 2006, when I went back to Afghanistan, I was very hopeful that I could see a different picture when it comes to the freedom of expression, cultural rights of the people, gender equality in the country. But I was shocked when I returned there that nothing was happening. While everyone was talking about establishing a just and civil society in Afghanistan. But at the same time, the cultural rights, the musical rights of the Afghan people were ignored. The role of arts and the role of arts and culture in building a civil society has been ignored.
And a very rich history in Afghanistan of art and music.
Of course, Afghanistan always had a very rich and vibrant musical heritage. Unfortunately, it was during the first reign of the Taliban that Afghanistan and the Afghan people were denied all their musical rights, all their rights and freedom to express themselves through music in all its freedom. So it has been denied this right. But after the collapse of the Taliban, when I arrived also in Afghanistan, nothing was happening. In the field of music education, cultural education, there was nothing happening in the country. There were some superficial short projects here and there within NGOs happening. But in order to ensure in long term the musical rights of the Afghan people, the cultural rights of Afghan people, and also to use from the benefit of the music, from the soft power of music in reuniting Afghanistan, in contributing to the gender equality, in contributing to betterment of the Afghan children, and contributing by arts and culture, and in our case precisely by music, to the establishment of a civil society, all this has been ignored. And there was no attention paid to these aspects of life in Afghanistan. I remember when I went there and I began advocating for return of the musical rights of Afghan people and the establishment of a proper music education program, I met many diplomats in Afghanistan. I met many ambassadors. When I was talking about the importance of a music program in the country, when I heard that music is a luxury for Afghanistan, there's much more important priorities that we should focus on. And my argument was that you're never, ever going to defeat the Taliban and the ideology of the Taliban without investing in arts, culture, and education. We have to give an alternative to the Afghan people. And that alternative is nothing else than education, cultural education, music, and arts.
A very important philosophical component of the world struggle to make music part of every broad educational exposure of people, and you actually succeeded in doing that. with the ANIM project, which is an extraordinary victory. Tell us a little bit about the school and what its aims are and were at the beginning, and especially about the Zohra Women's Orchestra as a step even further towards getting equality in music education in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan National Institute of Music, after 2 years of hard work to fundraise, developing infrastructure, developing a musical curriculum, bringing professional music education to Afghanistan to teach music to the Afghan children, has been established in 2010 with number of objectives. And those objectives were also closely associated with a bigger vision that I had for the rebuilding of music sector in Afghanistan. But that was my original intention, to rebuild music sector in Afghanistan. But after 2 years of planning, working, fundraising, I learned that it's a very huge project and requires millions of dollars. And then I decided to go with something small, to pilot with a smaller project, but a project that would be enabling us also to contribute to other aspects of the bigger project, which was the revival of Afghan music. A project that I developed, it was called the Revival of Afghan Music Project. And for this pilot project, I decided to establish a dedicated music education program for Afghan children, with the objective of rebuilding and preserving Afghan musical traditions, promoting musical diversity in Afghanistan, transforming the life of disadvantaged members of Afghan community, disadvantaged children of Afghanistan, by giving them access to a quality general education as well as specialized music education, to ensure that they have a better life when they grow up. And also within the objective was to empowering girls and women of Afghanistan through music, and to make a contribution to the gender equality in Afghanistan. This was the objective of the Afghanistan National Institute, towards which we've been working. And that's why at the beginning, when I was drumming up support for the establishment of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, and everyone was saying that music is a luxury for Afghanistan. But within a very short period of time, when we managed to establish the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, and the member of the donor community and the Afghan politicians saw that within 3 years, the life of so many people has been changed. When the kids were taken off the streets of Kabul and given access to a state of arts, quality, general and music education. And when the people see that a child who's used to sell plastic bags on the streets of Kabul, or selling chewing gums on the streets of Kabul, but they've been developing their musical skills, and everyone could see what a promising future these young people have. And that is when the time that more attention began to pay to our school, and also to see that in reality, music has a power, music has a role to assist politicians and to assist with the building of new Afghan society, to assist with the establishment of a just civil society, to assist with the building of Afghanistan, which creates equal opportunities for everyone, but at the same time respect diversities. They could see in practice that how much music can contribute to bringing ethnic tension between young Afghans by giving them access to talk to each other through music. So that's the time then the impact and the power of music has been recognized, and the impact and the power of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music has been recognized. I remember early days of the establishment of the school, when I received warning from some politician that the school is making a lot of noise and something good might happen. The school might become the target of the Taliban and the other extremist group. I could not believe, because I always was thinking that music has nothing to harm people, and these children are learning something that would help them to have a better future for themselves, but at the same time to preserve rich Afghan musical tradition, and also to promote musical diversity in Afghanistan, to promote gender equality, and to empowering girls through music and education. I could not see anything wrong in doing this in Afghanistan. But at the same time, I learned later that it was a big challenge to the Taliban. It was a big challenge to the extremists who could not believe in gender equality, but also in arts and in culture and in music. And that's why very soon after the establishment of the school, and as the school has been getting prominent, its ensemble in orchestras and its program, the Taliban sent a suicide bomber in one of our concerts. And since 2014, the school has been continuously in the high list of the Taliban. And the number of conspiracy or plan against the school has been disclosed by the security forces in a later time. But yes, definitely the Afghanistan National Institute of Music in practice showed the power of music, the transformative power of music, the unifying power of music, the ability of music to contribute to gender equality and also to empower girls and women in Afghanistan. And that's why, thanks to our commitment to gender equality and also to empowering girls and women in Afghanistan, we've been able to increase the number of students almost to 50% of the student body. In 2010, I began only with one girl. But in 2021, when the Taliban returned back into power, more than 1/3 of the student body were girls. But in addition to everything, for the first time in the history of Afghanistan, we managed to establish an all-women orchestra of Afghanistan, which became a symbol of freedom of women, emancipation of women in Afghanistan, which became a symbol of ability and power of girls and women in Afghanistan. Historically, women did not have a prominence in the Afghan music scene, especially as instrumentalists, as composers, as conductors. But the establishment of the Zohra orchestra, which became a huge success for Afghanistan, again, we proved this ability and the power of music.
I cannot think of a better example, as you suggest, of the success that can flow from the soft power of music, as you put it, and yet defining soft power from the standpoint of our community is frequently viewed, of course, as a tremendous threat, and the hard power of music by the folks who are trying to suppress it. And I think that, we'll have a discussion a little bit later about how to address that dichotomy. But you were injured in the suicide attack. You did recover, thank goodness, and continued with the program. And then in ways a little bit reminiscent of so many things we've seen in the past, including Weimar, unfortunately, we see the return of the Taliban, as you stated, in a more virulent form than even before. And you're faced with the decision of, do we have to leave? Can you describe the torturous decisions that you had to make in terms of helping the students and keeping yourself safe while seeking international help to essentially help you rescue the program and the kids?
When we are talking about the return of the Taliban, I don't believe that the Taliban returned into power. I don't believe that the Taliban captured power in Afghanistan. I don't believe that the Taliban defeated the Afghan government. Taliban has been brought back to power as the result of a larger and bigger geopolitical games. And today, almost 2 years after the return of the Taliban, it's getting more and more clear that there was a game, that the dreams of the Afghan people, the hard work of the Afghan people, the sacrifice of the Afghan people, the sacrifices of the member of the international community to remove the Taliban and to assist Afghanistan to move in a democratic path, all they have been gambled for the sake of the bigger and larger geopolitical games. But it was very obvious to me at the very beginning, is when the peace negotiation or the peace agreement between the United States and the Taliban began in 2018, towards 2018 and 2019, I've been always skeptical about this negotiation. I remember on the eve or at the beginning of the peace talks, we had our gala concert, which we dedicated to inter-Afghan dialogue through music. We've been always advocating for a dignifying peace, but unfortunately in those peace negotiations, the people of Afghanistan were kept out of the conversation. We did not know what's happening. And as a consequence, the signing of this agreement had a great negative impact on the Afghan army, on the Afghan politicians. And this, in a way, paved the way for the return of the Taliban to power. But for me, it was also very clear, all those speculations in the political cycles outside of Afghanistan, that the Taliban changed. Taliban are different people. But I was living in Afghanistan. We've been witnessing what the Taliban were doing. We were seeing and witnessing that the Taliban did not change. The Taliban are as barbaric as they were in 1990s. And that's why when the Taliban reached the gate of Kabul, it was clear that the days of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music is over. In spite of all the speculation that it's not going to happen, I was confident that it's going to happen. And that's why I began reaching out to my network. First of all, I reached out to the leadership of the Friends of ANIM, which is a non-for-profit organization established in the United States, to brainstorm how we can help the school to survive under the Taliban, or how we can make sure that the students who've been in the forefront of democratic values in Afghanistan, they're not suffering under the Taliban. How we can make sure that the kids can continue to chase their dreams after the return of the Taliban. So we could not see any other option rather than evacuating the entire student body, the faculty and their families, staff with their families outside. The safety, security, and well-being of the students was on the top of our activities in that moment. We did not care about the buildings that will be left in Afghanistan, thousands of musical instruments, but the safety, security, and well-being of the students was on the top. But I'm very, we've been very lucky that managed to leave Afghanistan. We've been very lucky to still to keep together, because living as a refugee is not an easy task. Maintaining a community together is not an easy task, especially when you are in a totally strange environment where you're just learning where you are. But in spite of all these challenges, thanks to the support of our friends from around the world, we managed to get the entire ANIM community out of Afghanistan. But again, it was not an easy task.
No, a monumental task, as a matter of fact.
Yes, there was many people involved. Without the support of the Friends of ANIM, the network around the Friends of ANIM, politicians, lawyers, philanthropists, musicians, people of goodwill, it was impossible to make that evacuation happen. And after the withdrawal of the US Army from Afghanistan and the international community from Afghanistan, the evacuation of the students of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music was the largest evacuation that took place after the withdrawal of the US Army. But again, we are lucky, and now we're here back in Portugal. We resume our activities. We reformed and reestablished our ensemble and orchestras. Well, again, we are slowly coming on the world stages of music. Students and ensembles are playing in different countries, different stages of Europe. But most importantly is that we become now the voice of the Afghan people in exile. We become the voice of millions of voiceless people of Afghanistan. We become the voice of thousands of voiceless Afghan musicians within Afghanistan. And now we are privileged to be the voices of the women of Afghanistan as well. So we are in a much better position to let the world know what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in the field of freedom of expression, what's happening in the field of cultural rights of the Afghan people, what's happening in the field of women's rights in Afghanistan. So we have a much bigger role today than we had in Afghanistan. Here we've got the responsibility of safeguarding Afghan music for tomorrow. But at the same time, we have the right to do advocacy for freedom of expression and the musical rights of Afghan people back in Afghanistan, for the restoration of the musical rights of the Afghan people, for stopping musical or cultural genocide once again in the country.
Well, I have to say that I can't think of a better spokesperson for those roles than you and the organization. I also think it's important to mention the relationship that you've established with the music community in Portugal and the philosophy that you bring in terms of music being a driver for cultural exchange, that you have incorporated the people and the students of Portugal and Lisbon and elsewhere into the new school.
We've been always believing in the ability and the power of music, bringing people closer to each other, connecting people, connecting communities, connecting civilizations. Even before coming to Portugal, when we've been traveling around the world with small or large ensemble, we've been always inviting young musicians of the host countries to join us and to make music together. And when we here in Portugal, of course, we've got a big opportunity to play shoulder by shoulder and make music with the Portuguese young people. I'm very, very pleased that we managed, in spite of all the challenges and difficulties that we had our first gala concert in exile in October 1st. And that concert also, once again, through this concert, we depicted to the world and to the Afghan people the ability of music, that music can play in bringing people together, and also the ability of music to advocate for large and more important social challenges around the world and in different parts of the world and in different countries, in our case, in Afghanistan. This gala concert was not only a presentation of rich musical heritage of Afghanistan, but at the same time, it was a wonderful opportunity for our musicians to play shoulder by shoulder with their peers from Portuguese conservatories. But at the same time, it was the most beautiful protest against what was happening in Afghanistan. And this concert was also a statement of the resistance and the resilience of the Afghan people.
It's a heartening story and an inspiring one. And for that reason, I think that your voice in the leadership of the world's problems occurring in this area is an incredibly important one. And we had the opportunity before we started today to talk a little bit about what you termed the soft power of music to engender this kind of change and to undermine totalitarianism wherever it may exist. An incredibly important concept. On the other side of that is the dichotomy of music's power as a propaganda tool, which is used by groups by the Taliban to further its own goals. But also, the fear leads to the kind of repression that we've seen elsewhere. And just a few examples, because this is such an international phenomenon. We can go back to the 19th century and talk about what happened to Native Americans in the US and Canada in terms of the destruction of their culture, or the Hawaiian culture. The Soviet Union trying to de-Westernize under Stalin. The Chinese Cultural Revolution, in which when Isaac Stern visited after Mao's death, he couldn't find a working piano in Shanghai because every instrument had been destroyed. And of course, the lessons of Chile and Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge and Pinochet, with great musicians, including Victor Jara, being murdered as an example to the people. If we are going to talk about what the music community can do, and I wanted to talk how they can particularly help your cause, but how would you advise the community as to how to deal in the future with a problem that is ages old, but clearly is resurging and needs, we need a strategy, I think. Do you have any thoughts on what that might be?
I also add one more area where you mentioned the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the Soviet Union, destruction of cultures, but we in Afghanistan, we are not, we experienced that also as well.
Sure.
During the first reign of the Taliban, we remember the destruction of cultural heritage of Afghanistan. We remember silencing the Afghan people entirely and depriving them from their musical identity and musical rights. That's once again happening in Afghanistan. So, and therefore, we all know that music has a power. You also mentioned that the Taliban itself, yes. While the Taliban are banning, there's a total ban on music in Afghanistan. Afghan people are not allowed to learn musical languages. Afghan people are not allowed to make music, listen to music, participate in music activities. Musicians are not allowed to do what they know to do and how to survive and bring bread to their families has been taken away from them this time. But at the same time, people of Afghanistan are resilient. They are putting up with it. But at the same time, I've been talking about the power of music and the Taliban. Yes, Afghan people are deprived from the music. They're deprived from all their musical rights. But at the same time, there's a particular type of music that the Taliban do not call it music. They call the word chanting or taranas, and accompanied songs, most of the time adaptation of very well-known Afghan songs. But that is used for their propaganda. You see the paradox here.
Yes.
Music is banned, music as an Islamic, but yes, for us it's good. We don't call it music because there's no musical instruments. But those pieces have all specifics of a musical piece. But especially when it's the adaptation of very well-known Afghan songs. You can't call it, you can't call it, it's not music. It is music, but that's the paradox. That is the power of music that they're using it. But on the other end, what we can do, first of all, is important the unity within the music community. And I'm very pleased that recently the International Music Council, which is the largest umbrella for music organization and music advocacy around the world, they come up with an official statement condemning the ban of music in Afghanistan and demanding from the Taliban the restoration of the musical rights of the Afghan people. So that kind of unity and solidarity between musicians is significantly important around the world. Talking about the power of music, but of course we have to show it in practice. But unity, solidarity, and using music for the best interest of the humanity, that's what we can do with music. We can also, we have many examples of in the history that music has been used for wrong reasons and wrong causes. But in the majority of the cases, music is proven to have a healing power. So we can use the healing power of music, the ability of music to transcend or to break barriers and build bridges between the people and bring people closer to each other. That's what we can do as musicians.
Very well put. And of course, the National Music Council of the United States is a proud partner of the International Music Council, which is collaborating with us in this program today. And that's exactly what certainly the two organizations intend to do in terms of preserving and furthering unity throughout the community. But it takes examples of courage And Dr. Sarmast, you are exactly that. Tell us how we can help your particular project and the people of Afghanistan reclaim their culture as we move forward in the 2020s.
To raise awareness about the plight of music and musician in Afghanistan, that would be a lot of helpful. Assisting and supporting to get Afghan musicians to safety and security, that's what the Afghan musicians need the most today. Providing a living to Afghan musicians, forming an organization to support musicians in Afghanistan who cannot feed themselves and their families. Many musicians are begging today in Afghanistan. That would be something that we can work together. But to support precisely in that stage, I know that we need a lot of support here in Portugal for our rebuilding of the school, rebuilding our program. It's important, but also making sure that the Afghan musicians are surviving this silence, this forced silence once again, and make sure that they go through. The days of the Taliban will be is counted. They will be gone. This tyranny, as all other tyrannies, will be gone. But we should make sure that we keeping the oral tradition in Afghanistan by safeguarding Afghan musician and music in that country. That's the most. But financial support to the Afghanistan National Institute of Music would be also helping us to be part of the safeguarding, ensuring that the young Afghan musicians who've been training, that they're not only well trained in Western music, but they're also capable to preserve their own musical tradition and to make sure that the aging Afghan musicians who are living in migration, they have an opportunity to pass their knowledge and the skills to the young musicians. So if anyone would be assisting us, that they would be willing, that I can send to you the website of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music with a clear direction which is available there that people can donate.
We will certainly be featuring that on the website as part of this program. And it is our pleasure and honor to help support what you're doing. In closing, and I look forward to working with you in the future, of course, but in closing this interview, any thoughts that or takeaways that you want to leave the audience with in terms of the unity that the two of us have been talking about?
I think a good example of this unity between musicians and the member of the community is the evacuation of the students of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. In that moment of hardship, there's many big names in the music industry who come to us to help us, to get us out of Afghanistan. And that was that unity between musicians. When I learned that Ahmad is reaching out to the world leaders to help us, we've been very touched and very moved. When we received an email that's a big name of the music industry donated a modest donation to the evacuation of our community, that clearly shows what's happening. So that solidarity between the musicians, especially in a time of tyranny, will enormously help in safeguarding the freedom of expression around the world, but at the same time in safeguarding musical tradition, freedom of expression in music, and musicians' life.
Well, I thank you for leaving us with those thoughts. I think that you're going to find that a lot of people, as we move forward, and they discover what has taken place in Afghanistan and is what is now going on in Lisbon and elsewhere, is going to be the subject of several books and maybe a feature film one of these days, and that we'll be talking a great deal about this chapter of history in the future. But in the meantime, we look forward to supporting you in your continuing work and taking your courageous example as inspiration. And I can't thank you enough for sharing with us today your knowledge and wisdom and insights into what is a really important problem for us to tackle.
Thank you very much. Everything that what I do is perfectly in line with what you're doing in the United States and what the International Music Council does around the world for advocating freedom of expression in music and also ensuring the musical rights of the Afghan people, the musical rights of the people around the world. And it's significantly important for the restoration of musical rights of the Afghan people. Thank you very much for having me in this discussion, and let's work together to use the beautiful power of music for the betterment of the humanity.
I can guarantee it. Thank you.
Thank you.